In this video, I'm going to talk about how to create a drop-down navigation menu using CSS only. Before I start, I should mention that this technique is not great for small screens or mobile websites. I'll still approach this from a mobile-first perspective, but the solution I present is not perfect for small screens. I'll tackle how to make it better in a future video. I'm starting with code I presented in my simple horizontal navigation tutorial. You might want to watch that video first if you don't understand all the code I'm starting with. If you want to follow along, you can grab the code from my GitHub repository named Dropdown. I'll post a link. I'm using the brackets code editor so I can see the live preview as I work. You can see that this is a simple navigation that has different colors on the active item and also when you hover. When I created this navigation, I used a mobile-first approach and I started with a simple vertical navigation menu that changes to horizontal on larger screens. To add submenus, you simply need to add a nested unordered list inside the top menu item. So if I want a submenu under tutorials, I can go to that LI tag and inside of it insert another UL tag and some LI tags for each menu item with a link inside. The syntax is just like the top level menu, just nested inside. I'm adding 3 menu items with some Emmet shortcuts. I'll also create a submenu for newsletters. Now, this looks terrible on both the small screen and larger screen. I'll work on the small screen first. The reason this is unreadable is because the submenus are rendering on top of the main menu. That's because there's a height property under nav li. The list items with submenus are only given 40 pixels, which is not enough to contain the submenus. If I remove it, the height will default to auto instead, which means the browser will calculate the height needed based on its contents. Now we can see all the menu items. The new problem is that the font size for the submenu is larger than the top menu. That's because I specified the font size with the M unit. M's are calculated based on the font size of the parent. And when you have nested elements, that can cause a multiply effect. In this case, the submenus are getting a font size that is 1.2 times as large as the main menu. So using M's can be frustrating when you're nesting things that specify a font size. There's another unit of measure called rems, which stands for root M's and will always base its value on one root element instead of the parent. That means you avoid the cascade and the multiplier effect. I'll change the unit of measure to rem. Now all the items are the same size. However, rem does not work in IE8 and below, so if you need to support that, you need a different solution. You could use pixels instead. I actually want the submenus to be smaller text to help distinguish them from the top menus. So I'm going to create a new selector for the submenu LI tags, and then I can specify a different font size. If I specify the LI that's inside of another LI, it will target the nested list items only. When I set it to 1M, you can see that the size is consistent. But I'll set this to 0.8M so that it's a little bit smaller. I don't like the text centered with this longer menu. This is coming from this text align center here on the unordered list. I want to leave this on the UL tag because I want this menu centered on big screens, but I'll make the LI tags have left alignment. So I'll add text align left to nav LI. Then I need to add some padding so it doesn't hug the left. If I add that to the list item, the border gets messed up, so I'll move that line to the anchor tags. The final problem on the small screen menu is that the border is not showing up in between all the lines. I have the border at the bottom of the list items, but since the bottom of the tutorials or newsletter list item is underneath the submenu, the main menu list item doesn't get the border. Instead, I'll move that line of code down to the A tag also. Now the small menu looks better. So finally, I can tackle the main topic of this tutorial, and that's how to make the submenus only show on hover on larger screens. That actually won't take much time. This next part of the code is happening inside of the media query. I'm using a breakpoint of 650 pixels because that's how much space the menu needs to be displayed horizontally on one line based on the width of the menu items. You can use M's or whatever breakpoint makes sense for your design. This code inside the media query will only happen on screens that have 650 pixels or more. The first thing I'll do is set the positioning of the submenu to absolute, so that the submenu is taken out of the flow of the document and doesn't take up height anymore on the main nav bar. I targeted the UL tags inside of LI so that this only applies to the nested menus. Now I want to hide these submenus. I can set the display property to none so the submenu does not display. It's a little hard to see, but the bottom border is peeking out from the main navigation bar, so I want to turn that off on larger screens. You can see the difference when I toggle this line on and off. Next, we want to display the menu when we hover on the parent item. So we can target hover on the parent LI and then the unordered list. The submenu is displaying on hover, but it's a horizontal menu. That might be what you want actually. If so, you could stop and style it so it's placed where you want and looks better. But I want a vertical navigation. The reason it's horizontal is because I'm using display inline block on all LI tags inside of the .nav. That was to make the main navigation horizontal. If I want this sub-navigation to be vertical, I need to target the sub-LI tags and display them as block. The width of the submenu is a little short. That's because the LIs have a width of 130 pixels, but the background color is coming from the UL tag, which does not have a width set, and therefore defaults to auto. I want the submenu UL tags to have the same width as the parent LI. If I say width inherit, it inherits the width of its parent or the list item. Now everything lines up nicely. I don't like that the text is now left aligned. Remember, I fixed that for the small screen. If I add this next bit of code in the media query, it still doesn't look like the items are center aligned because of the left padding I added for the small screen menu. I'm going to ignore that briefly and we'll fix it in a moment. Now all menu items are aligned to the center, including the submenu. It's not very noticeable when all my text is the same width, but if I change some lines, you can see it better. I want to center the top menu only. It's easy to target the child menus by adding more selectors, but I can't do that on the top menu. I could add a class, or I can target the direct descendants of the nav class by using the child selector, which is the greater than symbol. See how when I add the child selector, only the top navigation is centered. Well, centered plus 15 pixels of padding on the left. I can use the child selector again to remove that padding on the anchor tags. When I'm using this child selector, it will not target the submenu anchor tags because they're not direct descendants underneath the .nav div. The padding left of 15 pixels will remain on the child menus only. Of course, the styling on your menus depends on your actual content and design. You may not like the styles I'm using here, and you should adjust to your own preference and design. The main concept is the hidden menu that displays on hover, and that part of the code is right here. We hide the nested menu in the normal state, and we display it on hover. If you want it displayed vertically, you want to set the display to block on the menu items. The important thing to notice in this code is the selector. I'm selecting UL tags inside of LI tags. That means it's only targeting the nested submenus. It gets a little confusing looking at the different LI and UL tags, so make sure you understand that part of the code. You could add classes to the submenus to make things more clear if you want. This will work in all browsers except IE8. That's because IE8 doesn't recognize media queries. So we need to put all that code from the media query in the IE8 and below style sheet. If you're using a preprocessor, you can avoid maintaining duplicate code by putting the code in a separate file and importing it into both the main style sheet and the IE style sheet. So things are looking pretty decent in both sizes now. There are more things to do to make this better. As I mentioned, I'd like to make this better for small screens. On a phone, this menu would probably take up the entire screen. Also, some indicators that there are hidden menus would be useful here so the user knows they can hover to see more. Some transitioning on the drop-down menus would be nice as well. I plan on tackling these concepts in future tutorials coming soon. Thanks for watching. Please let me know if you have any questions.